Hi, I'm Jim Ward of the Middle Country Public Library, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode in our History Bites series. Today we will discuss the Battle of the Bulge, which was Adolf Hitler's last major offensive in World War II against the Western Front. After their invasion of Normandy in June 1944, the Allies moved across northern France into Belgium during the summer but lost momentum in the autumn. Meanwhile, the German defense was being continuously strengthened with such reserves as could be relocated from elsewhere and with the freshly raised forces of the Volkssturm, or Home Guard. German numbers were also bolstered by those troops who had managed to withdraw from France. A general offensive launched in mid-November by all six Allied armies on the Western Front brought disappointingly small results at heavy cost. Continued efforts merely exhausted the attacking troops. For the site of their counteroffensive, the Germans chose the hilly and wooded country of the Ardennes. Because it was generally regarded as difficult country, a large-scale offensive there was likely to be unexpected. At the same time, the thick woods provided concealment for the massing of forces, whereas the high ground offered a drier surface for the maneuvers of tanks. An awkward feature from an offensive point of view, however, was the fact that the high ground was intersected with deep valleys where the through roads became bottlenecks, where a tank advance was liable to be blocked. The aims of the German counteroffensive were far-reaching: to break through to Antwerp, Belgium, by an indirect move to cut off the British Army group from American forces as well as from its supplies, and then to crush the isolated British. Overall command of the offensive was given to Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt. As the Germans drove into the Ardennes, the Allied line took on the appearance of a large bulge, giving rise to the battle's name. The formerly serene, wooded region of Ardennes was hacked into chaos by fighting as the Americans dug in against the German advance at St. Vith, Elsenborn Ridge, Uffalise, and later Bastogne, which was defended by the 101st Airborne Division. The surprise German attack broke through the front on day one as stories quickly spread of massacred soldiers and civilians. According to the U.S. Army Center of Military History, quote, "For those who had lived through 1940, the picture was all too familiar. Belgian townspeople put away their Allied flags and brought out their swastikas. Police in Paris enforced an all-night curfew. British veterans waited nervously to see how the Americans would react to a full-scale German offensive, and British generals quietly acted to safeguard the Meuse River's crossings. Even American civilians who had thought the final victory was near were sobered by the Nazi onslaught." Hitler's mid-December timing of the attack, one of the bloodiest of the war, was strategic, as freezing rain, thick fog, deep snowdrifts, and record-breaking low temperatures brutalized the American troops. More than 15,000 cold injuries, trench foot, pneumonia, frostbite, were reported that winter. "I was from Buffalo. I thought I knew cold," Baseball Hall of Famer and World War II veteran Warren Spahn said in The Love of Baseball. "But I didn't really know cold until the Battle of the Bulge." Time and opportunities were lost, however, through gasoline shortages resulting from wintry weather and from growing Allied air attacks, which began occurring on Christmas Day when weather conditions finally cleared, causing the German drive to falter. This frustration of the German advance was largely due to the way in which outflanked U.S. detachments held Bastogne and several other important bottlenecks in the Ardennes, as well as to the speed with which British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, who had taken charge of the situation on the northern flank, swung his reserves southward to forestall the Germans at the crossings of the Meuse River. Another Nazi strategy was to attempt to infiltrate the Allied troops. Veteran Vernon Brantley, a private first class in the 289th Regiment, told the Fort Jackson leader in 2009 that his unit had just arrived in Germany from France when they were told to load up and return to Luxembourg. "We got word that the Germans had dropped a lot of paratroopers behind our lines and that they were dressed like American soldiers and spoke English," he said. "They were there to create confusion." The Germans also changed road signs and spread misinformation. The Nazis were carefully groomed for their dangerous mission, Life magazine reported in 1945. They spoke excellent English, and their slang had been tuned up by close association with American prisoners of war in German camps. Under the rules of the Hague Convention, these Germans were classifiable as spies and subject to an immediate court-martial by a military tribunal. After brief deliberation, American officers found them guilty and ordered the usual penalty for spies: death by firing squad. To stop infiltrators, the U.S. troops would ask suspected Germans to answer American trivia questions. 3 times I was ordered to prove my identity, General Omar Bradley recalled, according to the Washington Post. The first time by identifying Springfield as the capital of Illinois. The second by locating the guard between the center and the tackle on a line of scrimmage. The third by naming the then current spouse of a blonde named Betty Grable. In the small, pivotal Belgian town of Bastogne, the Germans surrounded thousands of Allied troops. Eisenhower, in response, sent in more units, including the famed 101st Airborne Division. According to the National Archives' bloodiest battle, when the Germans sent a message demanding the surrender of the 101st on December 22nd, they got a one-word response from its commander, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe: nuts. This was interpreted by German officers as a more colorful and negative response to their demand. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, and Lieutenant General George S. Patton, Jr. led the American defense to restore the front. According to the National Archives' bloodiest battle, Eisenhower gave Patton the Third Army, about 230,000 soldiers, and ordered him to head to the Ardennes. Patton's Third Army relieved Bastogne on the 26th, and on January 3, 1945, the U.S. First Army began a counteroffensive. Between January 8th and January 16th, the Allied armies concentrated their strength and were attempting to pinch off the Great German Wedge driven into their front. But the Germans carried out a skillful withdrawal that took them out of the potential trap. Through January, American troops, often wading through deep snowdrifts, attacked the sides of the shrinking Bulge until they had restored the front and set the stage for the final drive to victory. Never again would Hitler be able to launch an offensive in the West on such a scale. An admiring British Prime Minister, Sir Winston Churchill, stated, quote, "This is undoubtedly the greatest American battle of the war, and will, I believe, be regarded as an ever-famous American victory," end quote. In all, according to the U.S. Department of Defense, 1 million plus Allied troops, including some 500,000 Americans, fought in the Battle of the Bulge, with approximately 19,000 soldiers killed in action, 47,500 wounded, and 23,000 plus missing. About 100,000 Germans were killed, wounded, or captured. The Ardennes campaign of 1944-45 was only one in a series of difficult engagements in the battle for Europe, wrote John S. D. Eisenhower in his 1969 book, The Bitter Woods. Nevertheless, it can be said that the Ardennes campaign epitomized them all, for it was here that American and German combat soldiers met in the decisive struggle that broke the back of the Nazi war machine. Thank you for joining us for today's episode. If you enjoyed it, click like, and if you watched on YouTube, hit subscribe. Thanks so much, and we'll see you all next time.